A masturbation problem, how it changes your personality. I'm Dr. Trish Leigh. Let me tell you how. Okay, so first of all, I have to have the disclaimer that no, masturbation is not evil and it's not terrible for all people. But I also have to tell you that if you have developed a masturbation habit, that can really wreak havoc in your brain, and it literally can show up in your life as personality changes. So I know most of you aren't believing me out there. So if anybody out there has an example of how masturbation has changed your personality after I explain it to you, please add it to the comments below, because I love having people ask me questions or being able to get some dialogue going. Don't forget to subscribe if you get value out of these videos. Okay, so how does it change your personality? This is how the slippery slope starts and how it can get cranking faster than you ever believed. Now, what typically happens for young men in particular is that when they were 11, 12, 13, they developed a masturbation habit. And the reason that it developed is it became a self-soothing technique in some sense of family dysfunction. Now, all families are dysfunctional, literally all of them. It would be beautiful if there was a family out there that had no dysfunction, but all families have some level of dysfunction. And what that means is that there's some yelling, there's some shaming, there's some guilting, there's some bullying by siblings. So what can happen, especially in the case of when there's verbal abuse, any type of physical abuse in your childhood, and especially sexual abuse, what happens is masturbation becomes an out for you. So it becomes a self-soothing technique to help you to be able to deal with your world when you're a young teenager. So initially, it's self-soothing for pleasure, but it's also a way of pain relief. So what happens is, in those initial times where you masturbated for the first time, your brain got this dopamine dump that made your brain feel relaxed and made you feel good. And it also probably gave you that love and that sense of healing that you were dying for from people in your world that you weren't able to get that love from. So if it goes back that far, this is deep-rooted brain mechanism stuff. This isn't just a habit for you to feel good. Now, especially if it's coupled with pornography or with images or anything like that, we know that that pattern of self-soothing becomes hardwired into your brain even more. Okay, I promise you, I'm getting to the behavioral changes and how it changes your personality. So what happens is your brain gets locked in to this brain pattern that now needs the bigger doses of dopamine just to feel okay in the world. Because if you've built this habit over time, 1 time a week, 2 times a week, daily, 2 times daily for some people, then what's happening is every time you do it, you're wiring your brain to need more and more of it to just feel okay being alive. So if that becomes the case where this habit is consistent and frequent, what happens is then when you go to your child's birthday party, you can barely stand it because there's not that high level of pleasure and pain reduction. It's actually probably torturous because you're at a trampoline park with 14, 10-year-olds, right? So that makes it so that being in the world becomes very challenging without being able to get that release immediately. So the behavioral changes and the personality changes that happen is you become much more irritable because you need to have this release so that you can just get that dopamine dump. And we know also that there's actually neurochemicals in your brain that are released that are just like opioids. They're pain relievers. So not only is it dopamine that gives you this reward in your brain, there's actually neurochemicals that are being used for pain reduction. So what you're actually hooked on is the feeling of pain reduction with a little bit of pleasure. So then you go into your world, and here are the behavioral changes and the personality changes. You're irritable, you have mood swings, Dr. Heckle, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down, and your family never knows which version they're going to get of you. What that does is it changes your relationships for the worst. People don't want to be around you because they don't know what version. What often happens for men is that they're the very up version with their friends or their cronies, and they become the very down angry version with their spouse or with their children. That's not a recipe for success over the long run. So irritability, anger, mood swings, depression, anxiety, what happens is that will show up in your relationship. Your relationships start to deteriorate. And then you just no longer can exist in the world without hitting that habit more often and harder and harder and harder. And if you're there, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so that's what it's doing in your brain. So now let's talk about when this is actually a problem for you, because masturbating isn't a problem for every single person. How do you know if it's a problem for you? First of all, if you know that you have any of those personality changes, then I don't need to tell you, you're there. You need help. But it's also a problem if you know you can't stop and that you have a routine around it. And actually, your brain gets the dopamine dump before you even do it because it knows your routine. Your brain's been hijacked by masturbation. And so your brain knows when it's going to get the release, and it starts to drip that dopamine for you hours before you engage in your habit in the way that you do it. It's a ritual. It's become ritualized. That is definitely a problem. If you have to stop your work and your work is being impacted, and especially if you are at your job, which isn't always happening in COVID-19, but if you have to leave work just so that you can release your tension using masturbation, you're in it, man. Your brain has been hijacked. If you're planning your daily activities around masturbation, that is not good. If you are looking forward to it more than you're looking forward to anything else in your life, you are in trouble, my friend. So how are you going to stop this habit and break this habit? The easiest way to do it is with a pattern interrupt. And this is what I do when I help people in my coaching program. If you want more information, you can check out my website. What I do is use neuromodulation to literally change the way that your brain is performing and to help it perform in a different pattern that no longer needs that release to be able to bring tension down and to stimulate the brain. That is the number one way that you can affect change over the long run. But let me give you a tip in the short run so that you can start breaking this pattern for yourself. And I will tell you, it's harder to do without neuromodulation in your back pocket. But what you want to do is have a habit replacement. So especially if it's ritualized, if you have a ritual around your masturbation habit, then instead of having a ritual for masturbation, come up with something else that is self-soothing. And really what you want to do is you want to be able to get to self-care instead of self-soothing. And what self-care does is it puts the horse in front of the cart in terms of this problem, and you're taking care of yourself so you no longer have to soothe yourself because you're no longer feeling like you need a tension release or a little bit of stimulation for a little while to get your brain back on track. Now your brain's on track, so you can then engage in your self-care routine. And if you've watched other of my videos, you'll know that working out to exhaustion is the number one thing you can do. So if you watch anybody else in this space of porn recovery or masturbation recovery, working out, especially to exhaustion, is a really great way. Not only does your body start looking better, but your brain will look better and perform better for you. So that's a really great habit replacement. So in the middle of the day, instead of taking a break to masturbate, take a break to exercise. Go do something that's fun for you. Start boxing. Get the Fight Camp app, which I have nothing to do with, but it's totally awesome. Start boxing. That will also reduce your stress, which would be really fun for you and really really proactive in changing this brain pattern of yours. But you want a new habit, and a self-care habit is the way to go so that you're not acting out. You are on the road to being able to reboot your brain. So get a habit replacement and take your time at being able to do that. Now, remember, this is going to take time. So day number 1 is not going to be easy. You're going to have to force yourself. But as you force yourself, it's going to become easier and easier, and that habit will then be in place instead of the old one. And as you start doing that, your brain is going to change the way that it's wired. Now, for many people, even though you start unwiring your brain for this masturbation habit, you're not necessarily rewiring your brain in a different direction. That's where the neuromodulation comes into play. So if you'd like to work with me, I know how to do that for you. And that is one of the most important things that I can do for people is I can flip their brain in the right direction so that you're not just staving off the urges and the compulsion. You are now literally moving in the right direction inside that brain of yours so that it will no longer be as difficult as possible. Okay, so if you feel like you have personality changes that you might not have had, you're angrier than you were 5 years ago, you're more irritable, you're more bored all the time, you can't be with the people in your life, you're always trying to get into your masturbation habit or video games or escaping into something else, then it's probably time to reboot this brain, grab control of your brain so that you can move into the future as a better version of yourself. Okay, so remember, control your brain or it'll control you.